A most original and creative talent in our business. Would you welcome Mr. Orson Welles?
Ladies and gentlemen, Orson Welles again, come to call for another visit.
Good evening. This is Orson Welles.
Stay tuned.
Right after this episode.
For our discussion.
This is Orson Welles speaking. 2 weeks ago, I asked you all to go on strike. As price control came to an end, I proposed that all of us stop paying prices for anything until prices were controlled again. My plan for our dealing with the profiteers by not buying anything except the very barest essentials has been given a rather important-sounding title. A National Consumers Buying Strike is what they're calling it, and I hear from Washington that the idea has made a few lobbyists shudder. Well, I'm glad. If they shuddered, it was not because they're afraid of me, but because they're worried about you. The news is bad. The president's veto message was saluted with a great salvo of popular applause, but in spite of this, the administration has started to weaken and compromise. Yes, the administration, I'm very sorry to tell you, has decided to make the best of a bad bargain, to wring a few minor concessions out of Congress and let it go at that. Slice that any way you want to. That still is not price control. It's controlled inflation. What does that mean? It means such a panic of strikes as will make anything that's gone before look like a picnic. You can expect labor to take a lot, but you can't expect labor to take less than it needs to live. This is an election year, sure. We know all about that. They tell me in Washington that the administration's leaders are too tired to fight. But a lot of people are tired of fighting. 250,000 American boys are too tired to fight because they're dead. But they didn't die to make the world safe for inflation. That wasn't the general understanding. I won't try to tell you what they died for, but we might mention today that the dead have a few rights in a free country. Now I'm going to raise a lone voice in dissent. I hate to do it, but I do enjoy calling a spade when needs must be. The papers now are full of a new congressional investigation. This time, the accused war profiteers, the Garson brothers, are getting just what they've got coming to them. Their names are being treated in the press as were names like Dutch Schultz and Al Capone. But one Washington paper, a wee bit hostile to anything except white Gentiles of its publisher's denomination, persists in quoting from Who's Who in American Jewry about the Garson brothers to make it all look like a big Jewish plot. The same paper does not quote from Who's Who among the Baptists to spend its venom on Mr. Andrew May, the congressman who's been mentioned in the investigation. But why all the surprise? That's what I want to know. Why all the commotion? Doesn't everybody realize that a good hunk of our Congress isn't above taking a little here and there in one form or another? Well, I know senators who play the cotton market speculation on inside information. Drew Pearson has named them. I know liberal congressmen, and I use the word liberal in all sincerity, who are well-financed by small businessmen in their districts and who live off federal contracts. That's how these congressmen get back into office every year. Is anybody surprised at that? It's common knowledge that it's common practice. What I want to know is, when are we going to do something about it? When are we going to stop treating Congress like a lunatic asylum? When are we going to make Congress clean up its own mess and wash behind its collective ears and, yes, even bathe in public? The bath is drawn. They call it the La Follette-Mulroney bill. It's a good bill. It provides for a raise in congressmen's salaries so they won't have to beg or steal enough to live in the accustomed fashion and still make ends meet. This bill, besides, would civilize the whole business of congressional hearings so that both houses don't have to waste time by holding separate hearings with the same witnesses on the same subject. Calls for adequate research facilities, a most important item, and for sufficient clerical help to handle a congressman's mail and sufficient technicians to give the lawmakers adequate information on pending legislation. This house cleaning Congress desperately needs. The people of this nation desperately need this if they're to maintain their confidence in representative government. So let Congress pass the La Follette-Mulroney bill and clean itself up before its vacation this summer. So the weary battle goes on in Washington. And then there's the Battle of Paris. Paris in the summer is even less pretty than Paris in the spring. I mean, of course, the Paris of the foreign ministers' meeting. Watching those we have all this time, with all the patience and generosity that common sense will permit, it really does begin to look as though petty greed and blind local interest have led the spokesmen of the nations into such a series of stalemates and rat runs that they no longer know what they're doing and what they hope will be done. Quibble, 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 while the atom bomb ticks and ticks and ticks. There's Mr. Molotov. What's the matter with him? He frets about an I that isn't dotted and a T that isn't crossed. And the bomb ticks on. Then after the dot is firmly on the I and the T is crossed according to specifications, Mr. Molotov objects to the kind of paper the whole foolish limerick is written on, and then there's that wily bully of Great Britain, Mr. Bevan, barking about Palestine, making his little squeeze plays on the little islands of Italy. What's the matter with him? It isn't too hard to guess. And look at Mr. Burns grabbing his handkerchief every time Arthur Vandenberg sneezes. Gentlemen. Somebody pound the table, please, with a gavel. Ask the spokesman to stop speaking for just a minute. And listen. Tick, tick, tick. Gentlemen, what possible difference does it make if the line you draw is 5 miles north or south? 5 miles is 4 seconds flight to an atomic warhead mounted before a Super V-83 jet-propelled projectile. Gentlemen, 4 seconds isn't worth the argument. You'll be 4 days older before you win or lose. Well, the bomb blew up over Bikini. Radio listeners reared on Martian broadcasts were unimpressed. So were various admirals from the American Navy, a lonely observer from the Soviet Union, and a number of goats. The smoke, it seems, was insufficiently smoky. The noise wasn't so noisy, and the flash wasn't so flashy after all. Can't have been a very big bomb. It was certainly a big target. The little bomb missed the big target by just a bit less than a mile. The little bomb knocked out 9 clay pigeon battleships and sunk 5. Quite a little bomb. The Russians who don't have the little bomb want peace as much as we do, but the Russians don't think we are capable of keeping it. Keeping the peace, I mean, not the bomb. The main reality of the moment is that we aren't giving the bomb away. The Russians now suggest that we give it up. And if there's any moral sense in our position, it's the broad hint in the Baruch report that we all ought to give up fighting wars, whether with bombs, bubonic sprays, cholera fogs, or crossbows. It's a cinch we aren't going to settle anything with a crossbow anymore, and if we try anything serious with any of our new toys, the decision's going to the conqueror worm. The Russians aren't going to sit still for control of the atom by any machinery that isn't geared to the Security Council, where the veto is the Kremlin's assurance of the last word in any argument. Without that veto, the Russians won't go along with any program for making the atom behave, but the veto vetoes such a program. The Russians who don't have the bomb want to pass a law against anybody else using it. But we've tried limiting armaments, and that doesn't work. We've tried outlawing weapons, and that doesn't mean anything. We'd better hurry up and start outlawing war. You can't punish a nation for the crime of war until you've got something bigger than any nation to wear the policeman's star, to sit at the bench and dispense, among all nations, an old-fashioned commodity known as justice. Last week in Mississippi, Negroes voted for the first time. But the man who was nominated, which means sure election in Mississippi, campaigned on the cry that Negroes have no such right, no matter what the Supreme Court may say to the contrary. Indeed, the man Bilbo stands squarely on the platform that Negroes have no rights at all, no matter what the Declaration of Independence may say to the contrary, or the Bible, or any of the documents of democracy, no matter what the Negroes may say to the contrary. Theodore Gilmore Bilbo has been a United States Senator twice before. He's been twice governor of Mississippi, which time he built himself $75,000 worth of mansion back in 1908. A single vote in the Mississippi State Senate saved him from being fired for taking bribes. Theodore Gilmore Bilbo wears a scarlet tie to match his nose, but this is nothing to the point. Neither are the senator's campaign speeches. I cannot quote from them because most of the content is what a radio network calls obscene. Theodore Gilmore Bilbo used to be a minister of the Lord. The state of Mississippi and the white race ought to be ashamed of him. I'm sure the Lord is. Well, here's a letter from a Southern lady. Very nice letter. Dear Mr. Wells. I wonder if you have any idea, Mr. Wells, what it's like to be brought up in the South. To have it drilled and pounded into your mind from the time you're born that you're better and superior to the colored man. No, of course you don't. But I do, for I was born in the South. Oh, yes, I had my colored mammy, and I adored her. I played with the colored children in the backyard. But all the time I had the belief that God had created them to serve me and my kind. How could I believe otherwise? How could I know differently when that's what I'd been taught? Oh, I was never unkind to them, but they just couldn't come in our front door or sit down with us, or in other words, meet us on our social scale. Well, Mr. Wells, I've changed a lot since those days, not overnight, but when I first went to New York 6 years ago to live, I was a rebel in every sense of the word. The first time a colored man came and sat down by me on a subway, I got up and moved to another seat. If one sat down by me and there was no other seat, I stood up. wasn't very long till I realized that I wasn't hurting anyone but myself. No one cared whether I stood up or sat down. After I'd been there for a while, I said to myself, no one asked you to come up here. If you don't like it, go back. Either accept these people and their customs or go on back down south where you belong. Well, I decided to accept them, but that's all I did, just accept them. Then one Sunday afternoon, my son, who's in the Merchant Marine, and I were walking in Central Park. My son has been all over the world. Thank God he has no prejudice in his heart. I'm very proud of him. Well, suddenly we came face to face with a colored man. Evidently my son knew him, for he spoke and extended his hand. I was horrified. Oh, naturally, I didn't show it, but that old prejudice sprang up in my heart like an evil, slimy reptile. After we left him and continued on our walk, I asked my son, did you have to shake hands with him? My son just turned and looked at me. Then he very quietly replied, Mother, that man was on the same ship with me. He saved my life. He's my friend. There was something in the way he said friend that made me look at him. Then he told me a story about his last trip at sea. They'd hit a terrific storm. The wind had blown them 250 miles off their course. Finally, the engines dead. The great ship was being slowly pounded to pieces on the rocks. During the course of events, my son slipped on the icy deck and fell. The ship carried a large number of telegraph poles. After the other cargo had been washed overboard, nothing was left to hold them in place, and they started rolling. One of these poles caught my son across the leg, pinning him down. The huge waves lashed across his body. He called for help, but his voice would not carry against the storm. Another pole struck him on the side of the head, knocking him unconscious. Then Sam appeared, Big Black Sam, and with superhuman strength removed the pole from my son's leg, lifted him in his great strong arms, and carried him to his bunk. Mr. Wells, did you ever feel very small and very humble? Perhaps not, but at that moment I felt smaller and humbler than I'd ever felt in my life or ever expect to feel again. Many things have happened since that day, but my eyes have kept opening wider and wider until, from now on, thank God, every vestige and prejudice has been wiped completely out of my heart. About 2 months ago, I came back down here to New Orleans on a visit. I don't intend to stay much longer. My friends say to me, you don't act like a true Southern woman anymore. True Southern woman, I exclaim. Maybe not, but at least I feel like a true American. Mr. Wells, what can I do? I feel so helpless, so useless in the face of all this. For now, more than anything else, I want to help give the colored people their freedom. Yes, I said freedom. I'm just one person, and a very insignificant one at that, but people will listen to you, so keep talking on this subject. Try to get it through their thick skulls that they're committing a sin against God and man. God bless you. Humbly yours, Mrs. Mimi Fawcett, 915 Royal Street, New Orleans, Louisiana. Mrs. Fawcett, you asked me if I ever felt very small and very humble. I do now, and I've your letter to thank for it. You say people will listen to me. If that's true, I pray God I'm worthy of their trust. I hope people, a lot of them are listening today. I hope a lot of people heard your letter. You say you're just one person, a very insignificant person. Believe me, Mrs. Fawcett, you're just the contrary. You're a very significant person indeed. You're a white Southerner, and you've changed your mind. You've left behind you the black hatreds of white supremacy. You're not just one person. There are a lot of you. All the bilbos notwithstanding, something new and good is happening down in the South. You want to help to give the colored people their freedom. Well, that's the grand and generous wish of every good citizen. But really, Mrs. Fawcett, I'd save your worries for the white people. Slavery does a very, very terrible thing to any people. But the ex-slave recovers sooner from the weakening shame of slavery than the ex-slave owner. You want so much to help, Mrs. Fawcett. Why don't you try helping the white people to gain their freedom as you gained yours? God bless you, Mrs. Fawcett. Now my time's up. Thanks very much for letting me come to call. Please join us next week at the same time, same station. Till then, I remain, as always, obediently yours.
Orson Welles is heard each week at the same time over many of these same ABC stations. This is ABC, the American Broadcasting Company.
Well, hello again. This is Buck Benny speaking. We have another episode of Orson Welles for us today. His commentaries. This is one is from the 7th of July, and as we record this, we're on the 10th of July, so we're pretty close to the right time frame and everything. It's wonderful to listen to these shows that are 75 years old and see how they resonate today. Certainly, for a 15-minute show, to keep four of us talking about them and interested in them and have information to share about them, it's a pretty cool concept. And I'm sure Orson did not figure this would happen, but I hope he'd be happy with what we're doing. Anyway, let's go around and introduce everybody again. We have Terry Phillips over there from Imaginary Theater, and he's hi Terry. You released your science fiction episode, and you're working on I think, did you say you're taking a break for a little while, or you've got one
No,
more
we're hard at work actually, creating a fantasy episode that involves telepathy and interspecies communication. My hope is, of course, that once again it'll be a reflection on what's happening in our own times. This one, I don't believe will be quite as long as some of the previous ones, but we'll see. And then after this episode, which I hope will come out in the coming weeks, then we'll take a hiatus to develop the next season.
Excellent. That's exciting. I'm glad it's turning out so well for you. Any more information? You said that you might eventually have some information about how these were going to be out there in another new way. Has there been any work done on that end, or do we know anything
about
yet?
Doing maybe an evening of Imaginary Theater in a theater in front of a live audience. And I've got a couple of people talking about putting together an animated version, but I'm not too sure about that. It's a little outside my area of expertise.
Sock puppet.
And sock puppets, that's right, Kathy.
Kathy and I will do that for you.
And then the only other thing that is of interest to me as far as what else we might do here is to take one or maybe several of these characters and develop a series around them to see if they have enough legs to sustain more than just a single episode. But that it's a little farther out there. We'll see.
No, I think that'll be neat to see where it goes, and that's awesome. We have Kathy Fuller Seeley here, and she's written a couple books on Jack Benny, and we haven't updated lately with the whole Jack Benny thing. So where are we at this second?
Well, volume 2 of the scripts is in production, so I hope it will be available by the end of the summer. Sweet. And in general Bennydom, I've just completed scanning a series of scrapbooks made by an ultimate Jack Benny fan, 3,200 pages of material that she started collecting at age 13 in 1943 and continued up through Benny's death, passing. And it's just an amazing resource. And it's great fun to look at, and all the scanned pages will be available eventually on the same website where that the February Jack Benny convention that we participated in will be available. So I'll have more information about that in upcoming weeks.
Awesome, good stuff. And then we have our friend Vincent Longo. Vincent, how you doing?
Doing great. My major project has, of course, been working on the Orson Welles Heart of Darkness book. I'm also wrapping up a dissertation, which is about sort of vaudeville's influence on film exhibition, essentially shows how we got to where we are today, although it's more about the 30s and 40s, where theaters show only movies, which throughout its first 50 years of existence, movies' first 50 years of existence was not the only way movies were shown. They were often shown with live performance. So I talk about how we got only movies in theaters.
Boy, you all have such interesting projects you're doing. When I talk to someone on the phone, I've been doodling in my little doodle pad, and I'm sure someday I'll make those available to people from around the world to look at, and they'll go, oh, wow, what a brilliant man he was. But anyway, we go. This episode of Orson was, as they have been for so long, so interesting, so many things covered. We'll just start with our friend Vincent to bring us up to speed on what he's picked out of this episode, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so as always, I'll give everybody a little bit of behind the scenes Welles, and then make one comment to start. But I think there's some sign that Welles sort of is either getting bored or things are not going that well with Around the World. I can't tell. Around the World would only last till about the end of the month, but everywhere I can see it's still being described as a hit. So I don't know if that's just marketing or what, but two things are happening. One is that Welles is beginning talks of starting to adapt Around the World into a film. Alexandra Korda, who was a film producer and invested in Around the World, the musical, had part of his contract was to make Welles make 2 films for him, none of which ever existed. They never did this, but it was part of the contract in theory. And the first film was going to be an adaptation of Around the World, shot in Technicolor in Britain. And so Welles had started talks about how that would be done. Welles did shoot eventually later. He did shoot tests of this footage. From what I know, it doesn't exist, but they did sort of start planning this. The other thing that's happening, and I'd never heard of this before, is that Welles and his team are planning to also stage King Lear on Broadway. Welles had a fascination with King Lear and, of course, Shakespeare throughout his entire career. He's tried to make a films and stage plays many times. He never really did, but he was planning on having 2 shows at the same time with the same cast, from what I can tell. So he was going to have some people from around the world in his King Lear, in which he also was King Lear. So extremely ambitious. I can get the sense that he's trying to figure out either what's his next thing. Maybe he's just bored. I mean, with a guy like Welles, maybe he's just like, oh, I don't have enough in my plate. The thing, though, that I spent other research on is Welles starts to mention, and he sort of takes credit at the beginning of this episode for the strike, the consumer strike, which he mentioned last week and the week before. And I was really shocked on how much he does seem to take credit in this episode. Like, people are listening to me, they're doing it. And we have talked in episodes before where people did, not everybody in the United States, but people did stop buying. They did have some strike, which got the notice eventually of Congress, and they passed sort of a weak OPA. But I tried to find evidence of people actually directly listening to Welles, and I was surprised that I found a little bit. Most of the strikes seem to be organized by labor unions, so it's a continuation of the strikes that are happening now. But Welles seemed to be sort of loosely working with an Idaho senator whose name was Taylor. And so they were both basically calling for the same thing. But the only indication that I can get of Welles's influence is that he got a lot of hate at this period in this week from conservative political commentaries, essentially Welles's antithesis that are being syndicated on newspapers. And there's this one guy in particular named Paul Mallon, who wrote about Welles in particular. Not a very great picture of Welles he paints, but he essentially says that this Idaho senator, he says he only got elected because he brought a, quote, a hillbilly band around with him to attract people in Idaho. I mean, he's really like nasty, but he calls Welles, he says, Taylor and the childlike Orson Welles got 500 people to rally in an unamended continuance of the OPA. And so anyway, he does say also that Welles got front page press. I couldn't find that, but he claims that he's getting some publicity. But Mallon is a big supporter of industry and the same sort of argument that we've heard before, the claim that producers are being inhibited by OPA from actually making things. As we've talked about, most scholars suggest that's not true. They just didn't want to make things at cheap prices. But at least according to a couple conservative commentators, Welles was making a difference. So, his radio show does seem to be catching some people's attention. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I'm glad you researched that, because I was going, okay, are people really getting this? Did he start this, or is he just heading in the same direction people were already heading and just taking sort of saying, "Oh, look at me, look what I've done."
I think it's
Started-
definitely still part. I think it's definitely largely that, but there is some evidence that he's at least a poster child, a child in this guy's eyes, anyway, for this movement.
There you go. Terry, what were your what were your noticings on this?
Well, I want to build on what Vincent was just saying. This was an era of not only consumer strikes, which were comparatively minor, but labor strikes in general. And it was, in fact, such an important part of American politics and the American economy that it led to the creation of the passage of the Taft-Hartley bill the following year. It was the beginning of managements of big businesses move to limit the power of labor unions to the point where today they are nearly toothless. But in the 1940s, 1946, 1947, there were strikes kind of on a regular basis. On a personal note, in 1973, when I was a student in France, strikes were almost a daily, if not hourly, event for us. But in the United States today, we don't see many strikes of any kind, whether it's organized by labor or motivated by people like Orson Welles. At the time, it was a routine thing to do, and it was an effective thing to do. The other reason that we see very little in the way of strikes or boycotts today is that it doesn't seem to have much impact anymore. And that's in part because of the power of business, but also because in our day, there are so many ways to buy things. You don't have to line up or have one place to get what you want. And similarly with labor, there are so many options for people that organizing a movement like that is tough. The other thing I wanted to point out about this episode is that again, Wells being very engaged politically, he got into a lot of the details of the legislation that was being proposed in 1946, and I don't know, Vincent, whether Wells got as much pushback in 1946 as he would have had today if he were trying to do this on the radio today. But I think you're right. I think we were seeing the beginning of the fracturing on the air, which we didn't see quite as much of, especially in the wake of the Second World War, where everybody pretty much was lined up in one direction politically. The thing I found most fascinating about what Orson Welles said in this episode is that it was, once again, absolutely courageous. He come on, let's go on strike. It was like he was, down at the barricades with the protesters, and he in a previous commentary we were talking about Wells going after J. Edgar Hoover, which is something that nobody wanted to do at that time because he was so powerful, and increasingly so. Well, that was true in this commentary too. Wells seemed fearless, and he was losing his sponsor. He was not necessarily in the most popular position in the United States, and he wasn't bulletproof in terms of his personal power in show business. He still had to ask people for money to support his various endeavors, but he didn't seem to care. He was more interested in saying what he believed, and I found that the most refreshing thing about this commentary and about the whole series. The courage of Orson Welles.
Oh, that's great.
Agree with him or not, but he spoke his mind, and I really enjoyed that.
I'm grateful that the ABC network continued him sustaining for as long as they did, 2 more 13-week periods to through this. At least I know, my guess is Sunday at 1 in the afternoon would be a relatively inexpensive time to foot the bill for a 15-minute program. But for one that's talking about politics, I thank you, Terry, for that. That's to mention Orson's courage and things like that. I was really struck by how many issues, even if he doesn't sound like he has as much energy as he did back in March, Vincent, and that was a very good point. but still he's starting with consumer buying strikes. Then he's going on to congressmen and graft and corruption. And then, the International Foreign Ministers meeting in Paris. And then he's wry comments about the aftermath of the bikini explosion, which when it was before it happened, and he said, oh, some people think that the atmosphere might catch on fire, and the atomic blast could be the end of us. And here, what actually happened was that people wanted more bang for their buck. It was like, well, poof, people were disappointed that the bikini tests weren't more of a car wreck or more like 4th of July fireworks. And yet he goes a few ticks of the atomic bomb. I was sort of chuckling in my elbow about Orson's rightful attacks on Bilbo of Mississippi. And luckily for Orson, Bilbo would expire in 1947. Unlike I won't get political. Unlike some of the this is the rise of the Dixiecrats. He is really charting how these embedded Southern leaders really pushed the hard line on segregation and racism. And the letter from Mrs. Fawcett, I thought was really interesting. And I sort of thought, oh, maybe this wouldn't fly today, that if it was just released today, there would be waves of comment about, oh, she's being too much of a Karen. She's from far too much of a position of privilege to be able to do that. But this, I find, is one of Orson's sort of attempts to take the sort of middle ground to the conservative ground and to try and use sort of emotion and humanity and mother love and things like that to try and convince conservative white Southerners to perhaps change their mind about the situation. So from consumer strikes to using a sort of gentle hand, there's so much going on in this episode. So.
Yeah, you're right, Kathy. I mean, the other thing that happens in that letter, which will be a continuing trend, which will peak with the Isaac Woodard issue, is the rhetorical use of a Black veteran here again. We see that, happening as this symbol for complicating white supremacy and racial hierarchies. And so, I think there's certainly a lot of emotion, and he's using this woman as, sort of putting her on a pedestal and saying, we can all, agree that, you don't have to live like she did in the South. You should see them as humans, but specifically, you should start to at least see Black veterans as, giving them the right and privilege that they deserve as, great Americans.
And the fact that he's doing this before the outrage of the Woodard attack is prescient. So
let's see. A couple other things I want to also add to Kathy's great points. Not only does he seem to echo that people were sort of disappointed by the Bikini Atoll bombs, he then ties that into his same sort of argument before, which is like, this is child's play. Like, he constantly compares the bomb, calls like weapons toys. He's saying like everyone in the world was unimpressed, like it's this sort of showy game. He returns to that. The other thing, though, that I thought was interesting about his point about Congress and corruption is that you see a moment in which Wells's sort of beliefs on labor conflict with his sort of mixed emotions about Congress as a whole. We know that Wells is not a giant fan of Congress, though he has some progressives that he particularly agrees with. But he's supporting a bill that's actually to give Congress more money and more resources. And I think part of that is, of course, the idea that people should get more money, wages should be higher, which we know Wells is a big fan of. The other thing is sort of like his Marshall Plan beliefs. He says that he believes if we give Congress more money, they're going to be less likely to be corrupt, which I find hilarious, frankly. But it definitely plays in with other sort of Wells's really liberal beliefs in that sense. But you still see some claims against Congress that you see today, both against the left and the right. This idea of insider trading, this idea of quid pro quos and things like that. So, more money or not, Congress apparently is going to be Congress. Is what I got out of that.
That's great. Well, I am completely disgusted by my panel today because my microphone has not been working for the past, I don't know, 10 minutes or something. And so I've been trying to interrupt and say things, and then of course it hasn't worked, but they just kept going on so well without, it's like, I don't need to be here. You guys can just go on your own.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us, Daryl. We'll let you know if we need you.
All right. I'm sure the audience is going, man, I hope his microphone breaks more often. This was much better. The only thing I was going to throw in was just, I don't know. I'm sure this is just the feeling that I get, and if we were doing this 10 years ago, I probably would have the same feeling. Who knows? But I just feel like it would be so interesting to hear what if Orson was around today, and to see what he would say. The fact that Kathy brought up the whole Karen thing, that we have this big thing where we call everybody a Karen that's seeming intolerant of people and so forth. I just saw a lady this week where seeing something where she just goes out in her backyard and hoses down the next door neighbor who's a black woman for no real reason, apparently, just because she's black and she doesn't want to be there or whatever. I mean, some horrendous stuff. And then, of course, you have that. You have the whole critical race theory that is it would be interesting to hear his thoughts on that, and education in general and so forth. I just heard from we had a job here open up for a social studies teacher and position, and I think it's where the whole day with social studies, which is rare to find and historically coveted. And I was wondering, I wonder if this whole thing with critical race theory will affect how many people want to go for a job like that. Well, they had 33 applicants, so that was plenty, and so it shows it's not scaring people away from going into teaching social studies and that sort of thing. And then the other piece that I think would be interesting to get his take on would have been this whole withdrawing troops from Afghanistan, and whether he thought that was a good idea or a bad idea. I would think he would think it was a good idea, would be my guess. I mean, I can kind of think how he would approach these things, but you never would know until he actually talked about it. But again, as we talked, we just presented an episode from March that you folks have probably listened to recently. So I will dovetail with that piece from that March episode, and just say that we were talking about how countries that were like Germany and Japan and Russia, just sort of his take on them wouldn't always hold up with time and things, and because maybe he was against feeding the Germans because they'd just been at war with us and things. But then we realized, hey, they've been a supporter of us and things over the decades and decades and decades since that. That you never know how these things are going to shape up. And I think with his whole Afghanistan thing, if pulling them out, if Afghanistan's able to stand up on their own and be all right, then of course it'll look like a brilliant move. If it looks like it's starting to all fall apart, and if it continues to completely fall apart, then it's going to look like a horrible move. So time will tell whether it's going to be a good move for Biden or not such a good move for Biden. But certainly one that's been supported by the majority of Americans have been wanting to get us out, and we've been over there for a long, long time. It's just the question is always, okay, is it worth having our people there to prevent future problems versus pulling our people out of there, and then all of a sudden we have to go back in, and that would not be such a good situation. So we'll see. Anyway, Yeah, I wish we had a kind of an Orson today that would just talk to us about these things. Or maybe our problem is we have too many Orsons now doing it, because we have everybody on the left and the right and all over the place having their own podcast and sharing whatever their thoughts are. But no one that's I think is galvanizing or as that I've seen this as well thought out as Orson so often was, and just so interesting that he could talk about all these different topics. But
Yeah.
yeah, great.
Can I say something
and,
really quick,
yeah.
Daryl?
Yeah.
I mean, I think you're right. I think Wells is what I like. You know, obviously he's liberal, progressive in every definition of it, but he does present many times nuanced thoughts, and sometimes not nuanced thoughts, to be honest. But Wells later in his life seemed to become more disillusioned to politics in general. I mean, he had plenty of opinions about presidents and things like that, but when people would ask him later in his life about politics, he wouldn't really engage as much. They were usually just sort of, I don't know, superficial opinions about different presidents and things like that. He would often say, like, I'm a little disappointed I missed my opportunities to run for office. He felt like, he wasn't going to do it later in life because I'm not 100% sure why, but he felt like it wasn't the right time. So Wells might engage with us now, but I think that he wouldn't have such both nuance, informed opinions as he does at this moment. This is Wells at his most political, at his most charged, at his most passionate for politics than he'll ever be for the rest of his life, from what I can guess. I mean, he's always liberal for the rest of his life and progressive, but certainly not this impassioned and not this bold and courageous as Terry rightfully said.
I agree. Well, that's a great stopping point for us. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and tune in as we keep on heading this way with Orson. In a few weeks, the direction of the show is going to change entirely in a new direction, which I think will be a lot of interesting to talk about, and continue to be a great reflection of our times and where we can compare the two and so forth. Anyway, anybody else have any last thoughts? Are we good? I think we're good. All right. So we're out, and we'll see everybody next week for more Orson.